Views in the room as well. But I'm really pleased that Greg managed to move his time round, so he's actually going to come at 5:30. But he's here now, and then he's got to go do a debate in Westminster Hall. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to introduce it, then we're going to hand over to Greg, and he's going to speak. Then we're going to ask, because we've got the panel. So the panel are meant to speak and then ask Greg a question, but I'm afraid to say, your major thoughts, and just think about the short questions for Greg, and we'll have about 10, possibly even 15, but we'll see how long Greg's got for questions, and then Greg will go, then we'll come back to the panel, and then I think then we'll see where we get to, but we might end up with you asking the panel some questions, because we'll have lost Greg by then. But I'm sure they'll be thinking about questions and answers now, so think about questions and answers. So while we're here, I'm Alex Sowell, I'm the chair of the Net Zero Party group, and the group established 3 years ago is looking at across the whole range of issues around decarbonisation, how we reach net zero. Obviously, a real big ticket item is energy. We have a number of factors at the moment, I probably don't need to go through them all for you, that are really impacting the energy sector, impacting that road map to net zero, but also there's the whole issue around energy costs, which is number one consumer issue, number one issue for people in the country. So that's what we're doing, and part of our role is that we hold the government to account. We also work very closely with the Committee on Climate Change, and actually the next report, Committee on Climate Change report that's coming out shortly, we're co-hosting the event with them. I'm looking for the date now, but I'll mention it after Greg. 18th of June, thank you. And this year we're also looking at having because unfortunately in the net zero space and climate space we're getting people who are effectively putting forward myths about climate and about the net zero pathway, and so we're going to try and myth bust some of those, looking at different sectors, energy of course, housing, transport, etc., and work with you, particularly with our partners who I think are nearly all sat around the top of the table, but there's maybe one or two who aren't, working with them and others in the field to create those. But as I know time is pressing, I'm going to hand over to Greg, and thanks Greg again for amending your diary so you could be here.
Well, thanks Alex, and thank you everybody for coming. It's great to have this amount of interest in net zero. Fantastic to have this big an audience here in the House of Commons. So thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to maybe speak for about 5 minutes to leave the maximum amount of time for questions. I can already see quite a diverse set of people in the room in terms of different interests. Some people I recognise either from the industry or from advocacy. So I'll keep it fairly high level. But the question of how we can scale up net zero energy and keep costs down in an energy crisis is one, of course, that is utmost importance to the government and the country. Recent events in Ukraine have shown that building a robust, secure and thriving UK energy market is an issue of national security, as well as an important driver of the transformation of the UK economy alongside decarbonisation. Additionally, with the rising cost of living issues, we need to reduce the cost of how we travel, how we grow our industry, how we power and heat our homes, reducing demand as well. And that will only happen if our energy and gas supply is more secure, more sustainable, and less vulnerable to manipulation by others. So I'm proud that we already have a strong homegrown renewable energy sector. This has been a major contributor to the 26% decrease in UK demand for natural gas since 2010. It has helped reduce our exposure to global price volatility, but we need to go further to reduce our reliance and protect British consumers. The Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution in autumn 2020 and the net zero strategy in October 2021 set out a clear vision of how we will transform the production and use of energy in a decisive shift away from expensive fossil fuels. Our energy security strategy, announced earlier this month, accelerates this ambition in a series of bold commitments which put Great Britain at the leading edge of the global energy revolution. It will deliver a more independent, more secure energy system and support consumers to manage their energy bills. Some of our ambitious plans as part of this strategy include a new goal of 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. The current target was 40 gigawatts. We have installed about 11.4 gigawatts, the largest installed capacity in Europe, I add, which is more than enough to power every home in the UK. We also announced a heat pump investment accelerator competition worth up to 30 million to make British heat pumps, which obviously reduce demand for gas as well, increasing the UK's current 14 gigawatts of solar capacity, which we think could grow up to 5 times in size by just 2035, consulting on the rules for solar projects, particularly on domestic and commercial rooftops. As you all know, renewables are the quickest and cheapest route to greater energy independence. But sometimes you might see in the media, or indeed sometimes in the House of Commons, being presented as an argument for either net zero or energy security. And we need to all make sure we demolish that argument, that actually net zero helps, indeed is essential to get to energy security. Our strategy to generate more low carbon energy in the UK will shield consumers from volatile international fossil fuel markets and provide new opportunities to level up the economy and drive job creation across a range of sectors, including transport, industry and construction. Obviously, I'd like to reassure you that we in this country have limited appetite for hydrocarbons from Russia. In 2021, Russia made up less than 4% of our gas supply, and we have already committed to phase out our consumption of Russian oil and oil products by the end of this year. As we move to more low carbon heating, whether electric heat pumps or hydrogen and more electric transport, this will allow all sections of the economy to benefit from our homegrown renewable energy. Whilst low carbon technologies become more widely available, natural gas will of course have an ongoing role to play in decarbonising electricity generation, moving us away from coal and maintaining security of supply. Gas prices are at record highs and the cost of renewables generation is falling. By accelerating the deployment of cheap renewable power and rolling out further energy efficiency measures, the government's decarbonisation policies will help household energy bills by driving down costs in the long term. Green electricity isn't just better for the environment, it's better for consumers in the long term. Without the renewables we're putting on the grid today and the green levies that support them, energy bills would be higher than they are now, and businesses and consumers would feel the effects of these high prices even further. To support greater UK energy independence even further, we're doubling our ambition to up to 10 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030, subject to affordability and value for money, with at least half of this coming from electrolytic or so-called green hydrogen. We've also just published the hydrogen investment package to drive further investment. In fact, I came earlier today from chairing our Hydrogen Investment Council, low-carbon hydrogen production in the UK, and enable projects to begin construction in the next 2 years. So plenty going on in hydrogen as well. The Industrial Hydrogen Accelerator, this is something in the UK we want to be right at the forefront of as we go forward. So as we produce more of our own electricity, families will be much better protected from energy price spikes caused by volatile international fossil fuel markets. At the same time, by getting ahead of the curve and driving down the cost of the latest clean technology, more consumers will enjoy more efficient cars and heating systems sooner. But it's not just about strengthening our economy and bringing down costs. Immediate action on climate change will of course improve our health and well-being and will protect our natural environment, securing the livelihoods of our children and grandchildren. So many of you here today are leading the way on innovative solutions to help further accelerate the transition to net zero, and I'm grateful to you for all of your work. I'm looking forward to working with everyone in this room to ensure that we achieve net zero by 2050 and all of our interim targets on the way there. I personally believe, Alex, that many of these targets will push us, will challenge us, but I think it is perfectly doable to get to net zero by 2050, decarbonise our electricity system by 2035, to get to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, to get to 10 gigawatts of hydrogen production. I think all of these things are perfectly doable. It just needs a lot of working together and removing some of the obstacles. A lot of what you saw in the energy security strategy was about speeding up and removing some of the, paring down some of the current hurdles that we have to roll out further renewables in particular. So I'll probably end there and throw it open for questions. As you said, Alex, I've got to be in a Westminster Hall debate, probably in about 10 minutes, slightly less than 10.
There's a lot to go out there, grids, regulation, hydrogen, the 2035 target. So we've obviously I've got 3 panels of people, and also like to welcome Vera Hophouse, the MP for Bath, who's joined us in between votes. So I don't know, I'm going to pick on somebody to start off, and that's because he picked on me yesterday because he was chairing an event and I was speaking at something. I'm going to start with you, Myles. I assume you probably have got something else with scripted today.
I only have one question, which is, these are good times to be a non-Russian fossil fuel producer. When are we going to start talking about applying the principle of producer responsibility to fossil fuel producers and requiring them to pay for the disposal of the carbon dioxide generated by the products they sell?
Yeah, well, thanks, Myles, and it's a very fair question. I would point out, of course, that fossil fuel producers do pay more in particular areas. They pay corporation tax at twice the rate of other companies. There's mechanisms in place to ensure that they pay, in particular, for decommissioning. We have to make sure that decommissioning remains viable and remains, you don't want to make it too penalised to decommission. You don't want people to avoid their decommissioning obligations. We do need to make sure that in terms of CCUS, don't forget that the fossil fuel industries are quite bought into CCUS. Now, we may debate why that is, but I think they are actually providing a lot of the funding, the private sector capital is going into a lot of these technologies. So I think we need to get that balance right. We need, in the short term, probably for some time, gas production going forward. The last thing I would want to be doing, and probably you doing as well, would be importing more higher emission content fossil fuels from abroad than our own domestic production. But in the medium to long term, we want to be eliminating or paring down our fossil fuel consumption and making sure that those companies also make the transition. I might commend to you the North Sea transition deal. I think is an excellent example of government and industry coming together, saying, yes, we need you, but we also need you to change. And these are the changes we need you to make. For example, the electrification of platforms, the electrification of gas production. There's some important things in that deal that will enable us to move forward. So I see it as a collaborative approach, and making sure, as you rightly pointed out, they pay their fair wage, but also making sure they're incentivized to invest as well. Because what I don't want to do is to drive those companies out of the UK entirely, which will end up with no investment for things like CCUS. So it's getting that balance right.
I saw. Thank you, Minister. It's great to see the progress, and it's great to hear the range of solutions that you were talking about there today. Can I push you on two that perhaps you didn't highlight as much? The first of those is energy efficiency and the opportunity to use less as a way to emit less, and then secondly, perhaps nuclear as the other.
Yeah,
for that nuclear.
real quick, just on energy efficiency, you make a fair point. But we did launch the heat and building strategy right at the end of October, which put energy efficiency right at the centre of that. The government's investing $6 billion over the course of this Parliament on energy efficiency. We've put a lot of money, £450 million, into a boiler upgrade scheme, boiler upgrade fund, making sure the idea there is to pump prime the private sector to make the response to produce heat pumps in a more cost-effective way. And I think that is already taking effect. I think we're already seeing companies which are responding. I know Octopus, for example, and others have said they are responding and making more cost-efficient heat pumps, partly as a result of the government investment that's going in. So energy efficiency, I'm not saying it was very much about security of supply, the strategy last week. The heat and building strategy is already in. Secondly, on nuclear, this government, I don't think there's been a government as committed to nuclear as this government has been really for some decades, certainly all the time that I've been involved in politics. Our commitment to nuclear, we're talking now about nuclear being 25% of our electricity generation by 2050, 24 gigawatts in all, 8 power plants. That is a big increase on where we are at the moment. By the way, if somebody says, well, hold on a moment, Hans, that's a massive increase in nuclear. Well, it is, but don't forget Hinkley Point C, which we're building at the moment, and Sizewell C, which we're hoping to give a final investment case on in this Parliament. Those only replace the capacity, the nuclear capacity that's rolling off in this decade. We currently have 12 nuclear power stations in this country. 11 will be decommissioned probably before the year 2030. So that existing commitment only replaces what we've already got, barely that. Now we need to move forward and create more nuclear to be able to help provide that base load as we go forward. So a really strong commitment to nuclear within that as well.
Getting a range of questions. I think we might have we keep going on cost of living and energy costs. So I've got Allan from National Energy Action.
Well, Paul stole the point about energy demand, and it's absolutely right. I'd love to see the principle of Accelerator that's been across your comments on the strategy applied to that, not just as we saw in the heat and building strategy. But in the context of the cost of living and energy costs, it would be so good to see underpinning those strategic priorities some sense of where the costs of this fall. So not just the totem of cost, but the distribution of costs. We have a standing charge in the energy market, which is going to lay a lot of costs on consumers irrespective of their ability to pay. In a cost of living crisis, with the way in which a number of these costs in the energy strategy are going to fall, I think that the missing element of the strategic priorities, whether it's supply or security of supply, is not just demand, but the distribution of policy costs with some sort of principle about ability to pay.
Shall I take the other question? And then
Tom from CBI, and then
Thank you, Minister. It was good to hear your comments around the need for pace, and I think that's something that our members at CBI would definitely welcome. I've heard quoted that it takes roughly 9 years to get the necessary planning and environmental consents to build an offshore wind farm in the UK, whereas that figure is near 4 in some parts of Europe, so there seems to be a huge capacity there. What specifically can we do for those sort of planning and environmental consents to speed things up there? And the other part of the question is, one of the quickest form of renewables we could bring to market would be onshore wind. And I don't think you mentioned onshore wind in your discussions. It would be good to understand where that features in the government security plan.
Okay, great. Really quick, cost of living crisis support for bill payers. We, as you well know, we launched a whole series of measures on the 3rd of February from the Chancellor, not all of which have taken effect yet. The council tax discount obviously has come in, the £144 million fund for local authorities to support those who don't qualify for council tax fund, that has come in. The actual bill discount, £200 discount, that doesn't come in until October. We are and will be watching the situation very, very closely, particularly in the run-up to the what would probably be the 1st of October rise, or we assume it will be a rise, in the energy price cap. We'll be watching that situation really closely. Obviously, we won't know until the data which Ofgem gathers, we've seen Neil Kenward here from Ofgem gather and make that computation all the way up to, I think, August. So there is still time there, but we're acutely aware of where gas prices are today. And just for anybody who doesn't follow gas prices, I mean, it's worth pointing out they are sort of roughly about 5 times the 25-year historic average, but still well below their peak. That'll give you an idea of how volatile, which returns to me on an earlier point, that the best way is to be consuming less hydrocarbons and producing more renewable energy. But we have to live in the world that we're in today. So we're watching that situation really, really closely. Whilst recognising that the UK, we're not immune to rising gas prices, rising hydrocarbon prices. We cannot sort of shut ourselves off from that. I think Tom's question from the CBI need for pace. Well, that's why we've now got the Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force in place, is to make sure that those barriers get reduced, removed, etc., etc. The target is to reduce the consent time from 4 years to 1 year. That is quite a stiff target to be able to meet that. But the Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force will be looking very specifically at what are those barriers and slowness in the consent regime, and not just that, but also looking at some of the grid and transmission issues around that as well. So that is a key part of the ask of the Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force, which is co-chaired by me and the industry. And I think at that point I better go, because I've got to be in another debate.
Thanks, Greg. I know it's very pressured today, so it's great that you've had the time to come here and engage with the industry and from the NGO sector. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
We're going to return to the agenda. So we have 3 panels. We are going to have to do it slightly differently. And at some point I'm going to have to leave. So I think we've got about 20-25 minutes before the next round of votes. I'm sure Vera will have to leave then as well. on the nationality and borders bill. So the first panel, I think these three panels really, take the sort of circular view of the issues that we're facing around energy, the transition, and the current issues around energy costs and energy security. So I think it really helped people who've come today to understand those and have a debate on those. And I know actually we had over 100 people who couldn't come today, although we have got still got a couple of empty seats. But we're recording it, aren't we? Yeah. And so it'll be available online for those that couldn't come afterwards. So welcome to all of those who are watching this back later. Our first speaker, and you've heard him briefly already, works very closely with the all-party group, Myles Allan from the University of Oxford. And Myles worked with us really closely on the net zero roadmap recommendations. So he's just going to talk specifically about those recommendations in the context of energy and the fossil fuel phase out. I think we were talking about phase out yesterday in relation to COP. So over to you, Myles.
Thank you. Yes, so I just wanted to reiterate the question I asked the Minister, which is we're discovering the challenges of fossil fuel phase out at the moment, and one of the implications of many of our plans for phasing out fossil fuels over the next 20, 30 years is that 6 months ago we'd have envisaged most of the higher cost extraction for hydrocarbons being phased out, and a greater reliance on low-cost hydrocarbon supplies, most of which comes from the Gulf and Russia, as we move forward to a greater and greater proportion of our hydrocarbon supply coming from a smaller and smaller number of low-cost providers. A year ago, that might have seemed like a reasonable scenario. I don't think it looks like such a great scenario at the moment. Even if we manage to sign some wonderful deal with Qatar, I mean, please God, Qatar will be fine in 10 years' time, but who knows? So we need to think beyond that, and I think the crux of this is this principle of producer responsibility that Margriet will be talking to in a minute as well. So I'm not going to dwell on it now, but I think we need to recognise that if we're going to start licensing new production, which everybody around the world is talking about doing, not just Britain, but across the whole of Europe, people are talking about licensing new hydrocarbon production, we must make that conditional on the producers addressing the carbon dioxide generated by the products they pull out. Net zero means 1 tonne carbon dioxide stuck back into the Earth's crust for every tonne generated by any remaining hydrocarbons that get extracted from the Earth's crust. That's what net zero has to mean for it to be sustainable. And I don't think, for all that's been said and the very positive messages we were getting from the Minister just now, I'm not quite sure that everybody's quite got that. That's where we've got to get to. Because that means we're going to get there. We need 100% disposal of CO2 by 2050. To get to that, we need to be at 10% by 2030. With luck, the UK might be at 1.5%. 1.5% of our continued use of fossil fuels in 2030 being stuck back under the North Sea or stuck back underground. That's not a path to 100% disposal by 2050. And that's the challenge we've got to face up to.
Fortunately, Greg's gone, because that would have been a good way to challenge him. But we'll have other future opportunities, I'm sure, Myles, not in too distant future. So next we've got Michael Bradshaw, who's Professor of Global Energy, University of Warwick, and I think you're going to contextualise this around the geopolitical situation. Obviously, Ukraine's top of my mind. I'm not sure I'm going to address this, but what's now beginning to enter political discourse is because now we're looking at the renewable sector much more strongly, and so things like battery storage, is that many of our rare earth metals are in conflict zones as well. The environmental damage actually in strip mining in China, we've seen the recent pollution of the Yellow River, DRC, West Papua, other places. I don't know whether you're going to touch on those issues as well. Maybe if not, we can talk about them later. But I think we've got, there isn't a silver bullet for this. And I think that it is good for everyone to understand that there are multitudinous geopolitical aspects to it. So I'd be really interested in your perspective on that.
Okay, thank you. I had a fairly different thought, but I just got rid of that. So what I want to talk about, that was more about gas security closer to home, but perhaps we can discuss that later. A lot of my work is involved in what we call the geopolitics of energy system transformation. And we use that rather, that longer term, to think about the process of energy system transformation, getting to a net zero global energy system, in terms of two transitions. And I think at the moment, rightly, the focus is on the low carbon transition. But I think what we're having to confront now, and what Myles has already talked about, is the high carbon transition, which we've kind of forgotten about. That actually achieving net zero means managing down the fossil fuel system at the same time as building up the low carbon system. And there's also the assumption that that fossil fuel system is the one that has all the geopolitical problems, and if only we could transform to a low carbon system, everything would be fine. I think that is also being exposed as being somewhat simplistic. But I think at the moment it's important to think about both sides of that transition, because I think the 2020s, unfortunately, is a decade of a messy transition where we have to deal with both. And we're actually having to deal with some of the consequences of that high carbon transition in very dramatic and tragic circumstances, given the way that energy security has been pushed up the agenda. And there are a whole set of issues around the fossil fuel system and geopolitics, which we're well aware of, for example, to do with the resource curse, and what to do with the rents. And of course, there's a narrative at the moment, rightly so, around how resource rents have empowered Russia and continue to do so. There's the whole issue then of petrostates and rentierism, the relationship between carbon rents and democracy. And some of the solutions offered, and Myles is associated with these ideas as well, to do with divestment and non-proliferation, how we get to a situation when we leave the hydrocarbons in the ground. And that raises issues of stranded assets. All of those problems have to be dealt with through transitioning away from a high carbon system. And if we try to do it quickly, the chances are, unless we manage it, it's going to generate instability. So there's huge debate around the speed of the transition. There's also this notion of the just transition. The challenges and opportunities some would count as winners and losers, and we need to bear that in mind. Producer economies in the Middle East do not like to be seen as losers when we're talking about the situation. And of course, then we go knocking on their door, asking for more fossil fuels, please, and the contradictions are all too clear. But we're also now having to deal with the emergent geopolitical challenges from low carbon transitions. And if you've not seen it, I'd refer you back to the IRENA publication in 2019 on the geopolitics of energy system transformation. Low carbon transition means electrification. That means decentralization of power away from a centralized system. That raises challenges. It means intermittency, and that raises challenges. And it also raises the challenge of interconnection. And in fact, interconnection between countries is no different from gas pipelines. These are fixed infrastructures. You've just replaced the molecules of electrons. And it's not that long ago, remember, that France was threatening to cut off power because it wasn't happy with a fishing deal. Critical materials has risen right up the agenda, as we've now found that there are countries who have a concentration of production, and we're thinking about the need to reshore, nearshore, and the latest term, allied shore, are sources of supply of these critical materials. But we're also going to realize that the clean technology transition is really about industrial capacity, industrial strategy, the ability to build low carbon generating capabilities, and that we need to be aware of where these supply chains take us and who we're reliant on for critical sources of supply. And then finally, I would say that there's also an emerging discussion around international trade in hydrogen. But hydrogen will be no different than liquefied natural gas. I mean, hydrogen is an energy carrier, it's not an energy source. And it will be harder and perhaps more expensive initially to trade in that hydrogen. But it raises the same problems. So I would say in sum, we need to think about the two transitions. We need to think about the speed and manageability of the transition. We need to think about the justice issues and the inequalities driven by the transition. And we need to think about the fact that we will have new challenges, but actually the more you look at each of those challenges, they're new challenges, but they're all problems. Being dependent on countries for sources of supply, which present security challenges to us. So I think we need to be somewhat circumspect about this view that a future low carbon energy system is one free of geopolitical challenges. Building it itself will present many challenges. I'll leave it there.
That raises a lot of questions with me. I'm not sure about anybody else, but that was incredibly interesting and maybe a slightly different way that we normally look at it in these buildings, but one we definitely have to. And then in terms of the next speaker on our first panel, we've got Margriet Kuijper, who's a consultant for MKC Tynaarlo, and she's going to give a perspective on how the government can decarbonise the energy sector through the decision-making process. I think that's right.
Okay. Thank you very much. For you, those of you that don't know me, I'm from the Netherlands. I worked in the oil and gas industry for about 30 years. The last 6 years, I work as an independent consultant on CCS and carbon management. And for the last 2 years, I've been working with Myles on the carbon take-back obligation idea. I won't say anything more about the war in Ukraine. I think we all understand the challenge of that. But basically, it presents both a risk and an opportunity, I think, for the energy transition. The opportunity is clear. It becomes obvious that we need to transition more quickly, even more quickly as we were all trying already, if that's possible, hopefully, to renewables, to efficiency, nuclear, whatever reduces the demand of fossil energy. But the risk, of course, is that we still need to replace the gas and the oil that we were getting from Russia, and that we will be rushing into contracts with other states that maybe are not much better, as Myles said, or own domestic production, but without thinking about the emissions. So we are locking in emissions, which is exactly what the IPCC said that we shouldn't be doing, locking in new emissions from new projects. But if you read it carefully, they say no new unabated project. And I think that's where the key is, where we have to focus on and make the threat an opportunity also for the fossil energy side, because we will be getting rid of dirty Russian gas and we can replace it with mitigated, abated domestic gas production, or from close by the region, or from deals with Africa, or from with America. But as long as there is something in the decision making, in the contract, in the new license about the abatement. Unabated basically means the old-fashioned way with lots of CO2 and methane emissions. Abated fossil energy is with a lot less methane, can easily be done, and with a lot less CO2 emissions. For the last 2 years in the Netherlands, we've been having stakeholder sessions about the carbon take-back obligation. Is this something that we can use in the Netherlands as a policy? Because we've been struggling, I think, as most countries, that we'd rather produce our own gas actually than import it, because it's cleaner, lower emissions, etc. But people are not supportive anymore of new fossil energy projects. So how do you manage those contradictions? The government and companies are actually looking for a policy that will give the assurance that the emissions will go down, but that will still allow them to develop the resources. And the NGOs were very interested in it because they don't like subsidies going to CCS. And at the moment in the Netherlands, it's subsidized, so all the CCS projects actually need quite a bit of subsidy money. And that's not very popular, of course, because the NGOs think the subsidy money should go to new energy sources. And a carbon take-back obligation, by putting the responsibility on the producer, make sure that the cost of CCS is paid for by the producer and by the user of the fossil energy. And the government, of course, doesn't want to go to court every time they issue a new production license. So they need a defense in court for why they're issuing a production license. And if they can show that there is a take-back requirement in that production license, then they stand a much better chance being able to prove that they're still Paris compliant, as it's called. And this is really what the producer responsibility principle, or the polluter pays principle, is all about. The polluter pays principle is often used these days for carbon taxes. But with a carbon tax, the polluter pays to pollute. You know, they're basically throwing the CO2 in the atmosphere, and if they pay for it, they're okay. With a carbon take-back obligation, they're made to store an increasing percentage of the carbon they take out of the ground, thereby cleaning up and it leads to the same impact, because that means the product will get more expensive, and that's where we get to Professor Bradshaw, the phasing out. If the product gets more and more expensive, you increase the percentage, then automatically that will help phase out fossil energy. And you can increase the percentage higher and higher and use it for removal, and until you're happy that it's being phased out, if you want it to be phased out very quickly. And if you still need it for energy security, at least it will be used in a more clean way, because let's face it, none of us is sure that we can scale up renewables that quickly. We hope we can, but if we don't, we're all weak people, we will fall back on fossil energy, and then we need to have something in place that makes sure that the emissions won't get out of control of using those fossil energies. So I would like to end with expressing the hope that the Netherlands and the UK can work together on this. Our vision is a North Sea region where the carbon take-back obligation as minimum for fossil gas, but later also for oil, is being implemented so that carbon storage units can be sold and traded between the different North Sea countries. Countries like Norway and Germany are very interested, because Norway, of course, has a lot of export, and storage capacity. Germany is using the gas but doesn't have much storage capacity, so that would be an ideal way for both of them to make sure that their gas production and their gas use goes to net zero on time. Thank you.
Again, another fascinating one with more questions that spring to my mind.
Since I was very brief, can I just point out that in the 10-point plan from the APPG, the carbon take-back obligation was highlighted, and that was one of the very few points of the APPG's 10-point plan that wasn't taken up by the government's 10-point plan. But we're hopeful. We've got to keep talking about it.
Particularly if we have the group countries all working on it, I agree, and Norway, like the UK, is in the EU, which might help a little bit. That's a whole other question.
The Dutch minister has just recently said that they're doing a similar deal as you have done with the industry for a North Sea plan for gas production, that it will be considered in that plan also.
Great, I was just in the Dutch Parliament during recess actually, so I have to make another visit to The Hague to talk about that. I wasn't talking about that when I went this time. So, Vera, do you want to ask a question? Yeah.
Sorry, because we might have to go very soon.
Sure.
I can't ask my question. I'm Vera Hoppers. I'm the Gen spokesperson for the climate emergency, or how to get to net zero, or whatever you want to call it. I've got two questions actually that have been bothering me for some time. Whenever we're talking about doing our own gas production, which I think every Western European country is now interested in doing it, so they're not dependent on Russian oil and gas. People say, well, it won't make any difference to the energy prices for consumers here, because the gas that we produce will be actually sold on the international or global gas market. Well, then what's the point anyway, if all the gas is being sold and goes into one great gas market, whether it comes from Russia or whether we're producing it ourselves, it doesn't make any difference. So could you answer that question? And the other question is about carbon capture and usage. So I know that there are two things. You can either capture the carbon, put it under the ground and leave it there, or you can do something with it again. For example, synthetic fuel production. So if any of you could sort of answer that question for me, that would be great.
The first one sounded like a Michael type question.
Okay.
And maybe more than one for the second one. Yeah.
I mean, gas prices it is a very complicated issue, and there's a very thick volume produced by the Oxford Institute on different gas prices around the world. But here, where we are in Europe, we have a gas price primarily determined by what we call gas-on-gas competition. Simple law of supply and demand. Okay, so the gas price that is set is the price that we need to pay to attract the gas that we need. And you can think of us in the UK as being stuck between, at the moment, a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the continental European gas market, where the benchmark gas price is a Dutch price, TTF. Okay? And that is set through supply and demand conditions in the market. The other part that's playing a role is this price of LNG globally, liquefied natural gas. Okay? And so we have to have a gas market, a gas price in the UK, NBP, the national balancing point, which is sufficiently attractive to bring the gas that we need to balance the market to match demand. Okay? So that's why we are exposed to international competition. we tried to set the gas price very low in the UK, we wouldn't attract enough gas into the UK to balance the market. It just wouldn't work. Okay. Now, there are other ways of pricing gas around the world.
Sorry to dominate this, but what is the point of producing our own thing then? If we have fracked gas in, instead of staying at home and we can sell it as cheaply as we want.
Don't get me started on fracking. But okay, the point here is that it's this distinction between physical security of supply and price security of supply. Okay, so the argument, if producing more gas domestically, the argument primarily made in the gas security strategy, in the energy security strategy, is that that is more physical gas made in produced in the UK. All the gas produced in the North Sea, in the UK sector, comes to us. Okay? It's the balance that we have to secure, and that's what's setting the price. The gas that we have to import, our exposure to European gas prices and global gas prices. Now, the other important difference, and this has been alluded to, is the carbon intensity of the gas that we consume. And this is also lying behind some of the statements in the government policy, that actually producing domestic gas from the North Sea is actually lower in carbon intensity when we consume it, for example, than buying liquefied natural gas from the United States, which itself is sourced largely from shale gas, has to be liquefied, transported, and then heated to regas. All of that burns energy, so that we know that domestic gas has a lower carbon content. It's a lower carbon intensity. But that's not related to the price. The price will not be impacted by us producing more, but the overall carbon intensity will, but the other problem is that the carbon intensity we worry about in our own carbon emissions is what is territorially in the UK. So all of those emissions in the upstream in the United States and Qatar, we don't worry about them, not on our account. So it depends how you measure it. But unfortunately, the gas price, increasing domestic production will not influence the gas price.
Do you want to add to that?
Well, I can just say, I was going to address the second one.
Robert, were you got a lot of thoughts on the second one?
I don't know, Myles.
Sorry, I was jumping about to chip in. And the point is just to stress that we brag about making our own gas low carbon, but it could be much lower carbon. If we were sticking CO2 back under the North Sea at the same rate we were pulling gas out of the North Sea, then our gas would be effectively carbon neutral. It could be, in terms as far as the atmosphere is concerned, but we're not doing it. So the big question is, why not? On the CCU question, yes, eventually we probably won't use hydrocarbons pulled out of the ground. We'll use hydrocarbons where we need them pulled out of the air. But we've got to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming before the world stops using fossil fuels. So even though we in the UK could synthesize, So I was hearing from somebody recently from Formula One who's very proud of the fact that Lewis Hamilton is now burning a synthetic fuel in his car as he drives around the track. Now, that's great, but that synthetic fuel costs several times, as around a factor of 10 more than it would cost to pump up fuel from underground, capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and pump the carbon dioxide back underground. So we can't really expect Qatar to be using synthetic fuels. So I think we need to be doing both. We need to be, in particular, developing the capacity of the world to get rid of the carbon dioxide that's generated by continued use of fossil fuels. Because unless we do that, we can't stop fossil fuels from causing global warming.
Okay, so I think at this stage, we're going to have to go, and I'm going to hand over to Jill to chair, which is a shame, so I want to listen to Robert and all the other panellists, but just to thank everybody for coming, and I'm sure Jill will take it from here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm Jill Myles, acting the Secretariat, so I'll take over the lead. I think we're going to have, despite the parliamentarians having 17 amendments to vote on in a row, which couldn't have been foreseen, but it is that time, that's what happens. Bring back soon, and all will be forgiven. But we've had the minister, we've had a good start. So, what we're actually going to do is keep on the agenda. We're going to have a big discussion. The big question that we're really asking everyone to address today is how can we scale up what you thought about the Minister's overview of how well government are doing. But I think certainly from the net zero APPG's point of view, one of the themes that has run through and is very much in our terms of reference is whatever, we have to go further, faster, and it's all good to hear those noises, but scaling up is really what we need to do. And on top of, you know, a lot has happened since COP26, so it is that whole reframing of the debate. So the other theme for this year is very much how we get that delivery, behaviour change, and myth bust. What will be coming. So this whole process today is the beginning of that new discussion, which will be updated. But Robert from Manchester, it's your turn to finish off the opening sort of state of play and give your take on how we do go further and faster. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So the government's new energy security strategy has now joined the earlier net zero strategy and Green Industrial Revolution 10-point plan in setting out key roles for new and innovative technologies. Low carbon hydrogen, small modular reactors and advanced nuclear power, and methods for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere are among those set to help us deliver on net zero energy. But new and potentially expensive technologies such as these can raise important societal concerns, including, but by no means limited to, their readiness or maturity, their environmental risks, feasibility, costs, geopolitical considerations, safety, and ethical dimensions. One response would be to not use them, perhaps instead focusing on cuts to energy demand. This could certainly help to keep costs down amidst the energy crisis, but it too could raise societal concerns, not least of which would be cold or heat-related mortality and morbidity. And not to mention the fact that you can't just hypnotise people into changing their habits. For the promises of behaviour change to be scaled up, we need to change the narrative from we need to reduce this, that or the other, to targeting the relatively smaller proportion of people who overconsume. Indeed, in many cases, we might ethically expect an increase in the consumption of emissions. But it's a myth that we can deliver on net zero without new and innovative technologies. Take, for instance, carbon dioxide removal methods. In the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th assessment report on mitigation released 2 weeks ago, it's now acknowledged that the use of carbon removal is definitively unavoidable if net zero is to be achieved. If new technologies are to be scaled up then, they must be further incentivised. But it's also clear that they must be incentivised responsibly, not only to keep the costs down to consumers amidst the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, but also to ensure the broader legitimacy of, support for, and ultimately success of the technology choices made. It's the kind of thing that I'm trying to do as Responsible Innovation and Societal Engagement Lead for the UK's National Carbon Removal Research Hub. Let's look at the example of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, which according to analyses by the Committee on Climate Change and others, could play a major role in delivering negative emissions for the UK. Typically, when trying to account for societal attitudes towards new technologies, we look at how people relate to their physical characteristics, like in this case the biomass, the power station, or the CCS infrastructure. And we found out a lot of important things around this in terms of the risks to scaling up the technology. And these include public concerns around land use changes, foreign imports, safe storage, deterring emissions reductions, as well as, of course, costs. But technologies aren't just bits of kit. They're socio-technical systems. They simply won't work without the social arrangements that go along with them. The people, the procedures, policies, and so on. And when you present to people different policy scenarios for how BECCS might be incentivised, this can significantly alter public attitudes towards the technology itself. My research shows that guaranteeing a higher price for energy produced from BECCS can significantly damage attitudes towards the technology. This is the same instrument that has been used to incentivise new nuclear power provision in the UK, which has involved spiralling costs being passed on to taxpayers. On the other hand, paying a fixed amount to operators of BECCS based on how much carbon they remove from the air can give the technology a boost, as can placing direct obligations on fossil fuel power plants to be converted to biomass energy and equipped with CCS, and persuading fossil fuel companies to develop BECCS technology through the use of lobbying and certification schemes. The lesson here is that societal input is crucial if we are to scale up net zero energy. In doing so, we can build more democratic, acceptable, and intelligent technological designs for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, again, one of the things that is very key to the whole debate is how you get that behaviour change, particularly when net zero looks completely unaffordable. And I think it's all touched on that. So, and I think, we'll move on. Thanks for that, Robert. I'm going to turn now to our second panel, who are the people who are very much at the forefront of the innovation, infrastructure, energy use. You're all done a lot of work in this area. So I'm going to turn to Chris Paul from Atkins. I'm really pleased that you're here. I know you've done a lot of work in your energy report, which I'm sure you'll refer to as well. But your task really is to look at how we do scale up net zero energy.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Are we as an industry doing some good things? Yes. Are we doing enough? Far from it actually at the moment. And there's lots of different milestones that we all reflect on as an industry. And I'll perhaps just go to the 2050 milestone. If we are to achieve net zero by 2050, what does that look like? Well, net zero, the central pillars are electrify as much as possible, decarbonise that electricity supply industry, alternative fuels for those things that we can't electrify, and then capture carbon for the things that we just can't wean ourselves off the fossil fuels. Hugely energy intensive, and the amount of electricity infrastructure that we need, broadly speaking, you're looking at doubling demand for electricity in the UK, due to intermittency of supply and trebling of the amount of electricity infrastructure that we have connected to the national grid. And probably Sizewell B will be the only one between now and 2050 that will still be in existence in that year. So we are looking between now and 2050, so in 28 years, we probably need to build about 275 gigawatts of electricity supply infrastructure. Now, forgive the rounding of the maths, so that's 10 gigawatts a year. Over the last 60 years, we have averaged 3 gigawatts per year. Our maximum build rate has been 6 gigawatts a year in any one single year. So basically, we need to double the rate at which we are building electricity supply infrastructure in the UK and achieve that rate every year for the next 28 years. Alongside that, if we're then sort of building gas power plants because the grid needs the responsiveness, nuclear for the firm power commitment, the carbon capture and sequestration needs in the UK will probably be around 170, 180 million tonnes per year. That's around 4 times the current world capacity. So the size of the challenge is absolutely mammoth, and it would be very easy for us to get daunted by that. One of the announcements that I think took place, so how do we accelerate against all this? Do we just throw in the towel? Of course we don't, we can't afford to, we've got to go for this. And one of the announcements in recent weeks that I think is absolutely key, that I don't think we've spoken about this afternoon yet, is the role of the future system operator, because this is absolutely key. When we talk about myths, over the last few years, the things that I think have really frustrated myself and many of my colleagues have been the amount of single issue lobbyists out there that will push one single issue as the absolute answer. It's just simply not the case. This is a recipe, a mix of different power sources that we need in the future. Now, I think the role of the future system operator, if it is set up in the right way, with the right calibre, the right strength of individuals there, the ability to unite the industry together and provide the leadership that the industry needs over the next 28 years, I think that can be absolutely key to our ability to meet the challenge ahead of us. And one of my colleagues said a phrase to me once that was, just remember, it was less than 1 generation between the Wright brothers' first flight and humans landing on the moon. And I think that's the way we've got to look at this. So this is absolutely doable, but it's time to act, and please God, stop producing reports. Or as guilty as anyone. just going on with things. There are so many no regrets decisions out there right now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for frightening us
It's
today.
all right. Much like my kids feel.
But you know, there's a little bit of a humour in there, which I'm always in favour of. But it is the enormity, and I talked to Dave Cole. You know, he sums it up pretty well, and I know it is that. You know, we do need to clearly scale up. It's that acceleration. You know, it isn't undoable, but the mindset of government. Because I thought he said 10. He was talking about 10 gigawatts and things like that. You're talking 275.
10 gigawatts a year.
Yeah.
So that's what probably he's talking about. Yeah.
Oh right. Yeah.
It was his numbers I've just quoted, so I hope so.
So a long way to go, and Paul, obviously you had not a go at the minister, that's not quite right, but you made your points across. So again, on how to scale up, what's in the mix?
Great, no, I mean, thanks, and I mean, Chris has, you know, he scaled the industrial challenge, and you know, despite having an energy crisis, having a war, you know, we should give credit to the policymakers for the positive steps that we've seen in the last 6 months. You know, we have seen a net zero strategy, we've seen the heat and building strategy the Minister talked about, we've seen the energy supply strategy, and you know, it's sort of blindingly obvious. We all know that a mix of using less of the energy that's harming the planet and significantly increasing the amount that we're producing ourselves from low carbon sources is the cost-effective way to get to where we need to go to. And that's about kicking our addiction on gas, it's about protecting customers from volatile prices, and it's about giving them the low carbon system that they and we want. You know, all of those are, you know, they're achieved by doing the same thing. You know, the Minister talked about the energy supply strategy, which centres on more wind, on more nuclear, and on more solar. And you know, over time, that's going to wean us off today's high carbon, high gas system, and instead get us to a system that's going to have 95% of what we need coming from the low carbon sources. You know, first message, you know, we as a representative of the industry are on with some of that today. You know, we have more than a gigawatt of wind and solar that we're operating today. We're shortly planning to start the operation of our next offshore wind project, a place called North Nagoya, in the Firth of Forth. And that's going to be enough for another 365,000 homes when it's operating. And that's going to help towards the 50 gigawatts. So, you know, there is progress. And we've got some further offshore wind projects that are in our pipeline in the Celtic Sea. We've got plans for 2 gigawatts of onshore wind and 3 gigawatts of solar. And I can't remember who asked the question about onshore wind, but you know, clearly we would like to see the government be a bit more ambitious about offshore as well as onshore wind, because it's an economic choice. You know, we know that when you've got your grid connection and when you've got your planning consent, it's pretty quick that you can build renewables. It takes a while to get those two pieces in place to start. But we also know that you know, weather-dependent renewables can only be a part of the solution. And you know, we certainly see the best system as one that then has some nuclear alongside those renewables. And that's the way to deliver a system at least cost for consumers. And with large-scale nuclear, you know, like Hinkley Point C, which is about halfway or just over halfway through construction in Somerset at the moment, we've got a proven technology that's going to provide 24-hour-a-day low-carbon power, and it's going to provide 3.3 gigawatts when it's completed. That's 7% of the UK's electricity needs in one project. And it's one project is a start towards the 24 gigawatts that the Minister talked about. If we're going to have 25% of our electricity coming from nuclear by the time we get to 2050. But we also know that we've got a number of good sites around the country where nuclear could be deployed. And places where we know the grid connections exist, where we know that the communities understand and welcome nuclear power, and we hope that Sizewell C will be the first of those communities following Hinkley Point C with some new nuclear construction. And if it does, it'll make another very big contribution, another 7% of the electricity that we need. It'll also create more great jobs in the construction, and it'll draw on the skills building investments that we've already made with Hinkley Point C. And the vital thing to get on with is to get on with that project before those skills start to move into other non-net zero sectors. And if I can, that brings me just on to the energy myth that I'd like to try and bust today, and that's the myth about nuclear power being unaffordable. Clearly, building something as big as a nuclear power station doesn't cost pennies, but as other countries have shown, and as this government I think is now intending, building a series of nuclear power stations can absolutely deliver affordable nuclear for consumers. We're already seeing in Somerset at Hinkley Point the benefits that you get from building a second unit next to the first unit. You can make significant savings in the time and in the risk and the lessons that you're learning in that construction. The second thing associated with reducing costs is the financing cost, and we've just seen the nuclear financing bill approved by Parliament last month. That opens up the idea, the proven idea of a regulated asset base. And that's sharing risk between the project developer, between the investors in the project and the consumers. And by sharing those risks, you can significantly reduce the cost of financing the project. And by paying a very small amount during the construction phase, we're talking about pennies on the monthly bill for consumers, the prospect is that we will save pounds during the operation of the station. And if we can have a lower capital cost through a series build, if we can have less risk with proven design, and if we can have a lower cost financing structure, all of that will reduce the cost to the system of nuclear. And if you put those together with the substantial system benefit that comes from having some nuclear in the mix, with its reliability and the backup that it provides, then you're talking about maybe a £5 billion reduction in the annual cost of the total system. And that's the thing that kills that myth of unaffordable nuclear. It is affordable and it's cheaper than other options.
Thank you, and thank you for giving that myth busting. And if anybody wants to do the same, carry on, because we're disconnecting that. So I'm going to introduce now Rachel Fletcher, who's done a very important job at Octopus Energy, looking after regulation and economics. So Rachel, over to you on scaling up net zero.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for inviting us along this afternoon. I wanted to get practical as well, actually, and highlight three areas in policy that I think are missing if we want to scale up and do so at minimum cost. And I do have a myth to bust as well, you'll be pleased to know. Three key things I think we really drastically need to be getting on with very, very quickly. Firstly, it seems obvious to me that one of the key ways that we can both achieve that 10 gigawatt investment a year at speed and do it as cheaply as possible is to make sure that we're squeezing as much of those new renewable investments onto the existing grid as we possibly can. And in order to optimise the system, we desperately need market reform and new network charging arrangements so that we are actually giving investment signals to invest where there's spare grid capacity or indeed where there might be demand locally, and to make sure that we are giving price signals signal the incentive to invest in flexibility needed for a smart and efficient system. So that's one thing that I think is missing right now. There's a promise, a tantalising tease, if you like, in the energy security strategy to have a review of energy markets, but I'm not betting any money on that delivering anything, or certainly not delivering anything quickly enough to make each one of those gigawatts of investment to make sure that it's locating in the right place and making the most of a system actually that customers have already paid for and continuing to pay for. The second area, and it's been touched on by a number of other speakers, but we desperately need a revision to the onshore planning regime. We can build a wind farm in a year. What takes 7 years is the long drawn out planning process. We have a proposal to create wind permission zones, which have been identified as being suitable for wind, that are coming already with some of the basic environmental planning permissions, environmental clearances, and where it's clear that there is network availability, and so you're not having to spend time investing in unnecessary assets. A number of people have commented that onshore wind is some of the cheapest form of renewables, and we have got plenty of places on this island that are suitable for onshore wind. The third thing I want to say about policy and the approach to net zero is actually building on a point that Robert made, I think, incredibly eloquently. I feel that we need to put customers much more at the heart of our policy making on net zero. If we're not bringing customers with us, it is going to slow things down, it is going to make things more expensive. The next phase of decarbonisation is going to involve customers making decisions about what technology they invest in when their gas boiler breaks, what car they drive. It's going to involve customers and citizens having a role in either holding up the planning for that new wind farm or that new connection to offshore wind grids, or approving it and not standing in the way of it. And it's going to involve customers, and can involve customers, shifting their demands so that they're using energy when it's cheap and plentiful and not putting a strain on the grid when it isn't. We desperately need to bring that thinking into our policy debate. It is absent. And just again, building on points that have already been made, I think this is brought into really sharp relief today with the affordability crisis that we're facing. You can't possibly expect people to start to think about how they're investing in their homes, or even how they might shift their energy use, if actually they're struggling just to heat their homes and pay the monthly bill. And that needs urgent attention. I would like to see that issue being seen as part and parcel of the decarbonisation net zero debate, because if we don't address it, it's really going to hold us off. And then the myth bust. I think the myth that some like to propagate is that using customer demand side flexibility to keep our costs down in a low carbon system is a pipe dream. I have to say at Octopus Energy, we now have about 65,000 customers on time of use tariffs, shifting their energy use every day. Electric vehicle users shifting their peak demand by 10%. Those with day ahead time of use tariffs doing something similar. And you don't need to be a super tech savvy whiz kid either to be participating in these kind of services for the grid. We most recently had 50,000 customers simply signing up and agreeing to respond to a turn down signal from us, a simple email a day ahead. And what we've seen is from those 50,000 customers just responding to an email, we've seen 10 megawatts coming off the times when the system us much more where that's coming from, and empowering customers and incentivising customers to participate in this way really needs much more attention.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and I think we will segue quite well the idea into what business and consumer sort of and regulatory sort of thing. But before we do, I want to hear from Mike Theobald from WSP. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Gillian.
And I'm sorry about the bells, it's just who's the point? It's one after the other.
Okay, thank you. So delighted to be John Cleese sketches a bit, oh, more this and more that, and what yesterday was plenty more doing. I mean, there's a whole. I mean, I operate in the arena of strategy and set, projects identified, albeit, you know, I help the development of those strategies and identifying those projects, but more than 90% of my time is involved with project team. Go building. So, and you know, I think we need to maybe have a bit of an address towards you know, the deliverability of these projects. So it's quite frightening figures from Chris earlier that we have to be delivering 10 gigawatts per year, year on year, all the way to approaching 2050. That is absolutely staggering. You know, we're charging up the lake curve. We have managed on average 3 gigawatts and 6 gigawatts on a max, I think the figures quoted. You know, we are a long way from being in a place where we've got the supply chain and the people in place to deliver that type of target. So deliverability really ranks very high for me as an issue to address. You know, the CITB estimated that we're going to need 350,000 additional construction workers to meet 2050 targets. And we need those workers by 2028. Now that is huge. So, and those figures predate the energy security strategy. So, you know, we can expect an additional layer on top of those numbers as well. It's absolutely staggering. So, you know, with the work that we do at WSP, and I'm sure it's the same with Chris, finding a few hundred to deploy onto construction projects at this point in time is the devil's own job. Finding 10 or 20 to work on a specific design stage of a project is actually very hard as well. So there's the human resource factor in all of this is probably going to be the rate limiting factor. You know, with the recent mini dust to dash the oil and gas back into the southern North Sea or North Sea, that's actually taking resource away from many of the renewables technologies that we've been converting people into from the oil and gas sector. So we've got a starvation of resource there as well. So, you know, my take is we need to do a lot of rinse and repeat. So, building on what Paul mentioned, series builds out. We have an established supply chain. We have an established design, more or less. We need to focus on technologies that are, you know, technology shovel ready. So, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, ready deployable. Everybody understands it. The supply chain is geared up to deliver it. The raw materials is still a big debate. We haven't discussed Russia too much, but I think we still don't have a firm grip on where the current conflict is going to lead us in terms of raw materials. I think what we'll find is secondary issues elevating themselves to be primary issues in the supply chain. We only have to look at nickel. We've got projects that we're having to convert to, without getting too technical, stainless steel delivery instead of Inconel delivery, all because the vast majority of nickel supply is tied up in Russia. And the globe is round. So we've got some big issues ahead. So the more we can focus on rinse repeat type technologies, redeploy, make best use of this existing infrastructure. I mean, I'll quote a particular project in the southern North Sea that's just had first gas twice. That project was saved maybe 2 or 3 years just on the fact it recommissioned a pipeline that takes gas from the offshore asset onshore. The 20 years lifetime in that pipeline, and this company decided to link up a few satellite assets and bundle them together and recommission the pipeline. So we've got one shot at this. If we're already on the lake curve, we really have got one shot at this. We've got to make the sensible decisions, like we all do with our pensions. We invest early, thinking we can take it easy a bit later on. We've got to think about that in terms of the climate pension. We're already late. Doesn't mean we can't start taking that approach now. Get the infrastructure into the ground that we can get into the ground, and then concentrate on the larger scale issues. We might have some tough decisions to make with a want of 350,000 construction workers, and that's just construction, let alone design and everything else that goes around it. We may have to take some tough decisions on our infrastructure plans.
Again, that's a bit depressing.
I've got a myth.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Heat pumps.
Heat pumps.
I hear it all the time. You don't work in winter. Cotswold. They do work in winter down to -25°C. You only have to look at the deployment of heat pumps in Sweden, and they've got, I think, something like per capita the highest heat pump installations on globally, about 20% per capita. So.
Just a small comment from the Netherlands. We had the same discussion in the Netherlands, and we ended up, I think, deciding on hybrid heat pumps for the time being, not because heat pumps don't work, as you say, they work, but you need to have very well insulated houses. And a full heat pump, you get huge peaks in the grid also, and most local grids cannot handle that electricity. So you get the issue of, will you upgrade the local grids or not, or will you go for hybrid heat pumps and do it more quickly? And in the Netherlands, I guess, for whatever reason, they decided to focus on hybrid heat pumps for the time being.
If I may, that's why you need smart heat pumps, which is what we're installing.
Okay.
So you can shift how the heat pump is pulling from the grid, so that you're making use of the existing grid capacity.
Everybody gets their turn in heating their house.
It helps if you've got a more efficient, energy efficient house as well. So you've got to spend money on energy efficiency to get the front ready.
This is now the main event. I'm going to reverse the action. I'm leaving on heat pumps because I think we could be here all day, and I think this is what this session is really about: the consumer, business consumers. How are we going to keep those prices? I'm going to reverse the order, and if you don't mind, Neil, because you're the regulator, and you're the one that's got a rather big problem at the moment to sort out. I think it would be good if you could actually hear what the business and the consumer and the citizens are actually saying, and then respond to that. And then please bear with you, because this is what I'm most interested. We've all touched on about the need for behaviour change. It is really difficult at this time to even think about, electric cars or heat pumps or whatever at a time like this. But we do need that behaviour change. But we also need to make net zero as affordable and attractive as possible, and as a proper alternative. But we're nowhere near that, and we'll never get to where Chris wants to be. unless there is that push around affordability. So the CBI, I want to know how we're going to keep costs down for the businesses and what businesses do.
Okay, great, thank you. So yeah, pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact on businesses, because I think it's often lost, I think, in the nature of this energy crisis. But businesses have been really suffering over the last 6 months. Obviously, there's no price cap for business energy costs, so they've been facing into this for a long while. And obviously, this energy crisis pre-existed the conflict in Ukraine, so that situation has made the pre-existing energy crisis a lot worse. And obviously, there's very few companies now who are still operating under contracts, energy contracts that they signed prior to that crisis. So those hedge positions have unwound, and now they're trying to renegotiate on prices that are often double, sometimes 3 or 4 times more expensive over the long term. So that's a huge challenge for all businesses to deal with. I think the second point to make is that the impact on UK businesses is often worse than their international competitors. Electricity prices in the UK have been historically higher. Industrial electricity prices have been higher for UK firms than their international counterparts. And because of gas's role in our electricity mix, the spikes that we've seen in prices in recent months have been more dramatic for UK-based firms compared with their international counterparts as well. And those on the front line of these changes have really been the energy-intensive industries that make up the bedrock of our supply chains, who make the products that we consume on a daily basis. Other governments are stepping in to support the energy-intensive sector, so we've seen Italy provides tax credits worth up to 20%, we've seen Portugal subsidising their energy-intensive businesses, France with a really generous package ahead of their presidential elections, possibly quite cynical, but you can see that many governments are starting to step up to provide that support, and it's really important that we're not left behind. I think often the barometer that parts of government use to assess whether support for industry is needed is, are these firms going to go out of business? And I think a lot of these firms are very well run, they're family businesses, been around for generations, they're probably not going to go bust. But what we're not going to see is the investments that they have planned over the next couple of years. And I've spoken to two businesses in recent weeks who are delaying significant investments, multi-million pounds investments in net zero technologies that they're going to bring on stream in the next couple of years because they simply cannot afford to do it right now. So there's that element, and I've also spoken to businesses, international businesses, who are considering where to build plants. Looking at the UK relative to other countries, the energy costs is something that they always question about the UK's viability as an investment destination. So it's serious. But what does it mean for net zero? Well, I think the good news is that I've seen absolutely no evidence that CBI's membership is rolling back on its commitments to net zero. If anything, I think the crisis has sort of hardened resolve to do more, to go faster, and they want to see more urgency. And I think while the energy security strategy sort of touched most of the right points with some emissions, such as onshore wind, I think that sense of urgency is still lacking. I think it felt like continuity rather than a step change for a lot of our members. So how do we inject that real sense of pace into the policy environment? We do think that there needs to be some targeted support for businesses in the short term with the current spike in energy costs. We're not asking for an energy price cap for businesses, but some cash flow support, such as provided through the recovery loan scheme, would be helpful for most businesses. And then looking at the competitiveness for our energy-intensive sector in particular. And then I'll add my voice to others who have called for a national programme for energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation. It really is a no-brainer, a win-win situation. All of those other cliches around why we need better insulated homes. Obviously, the challenge is there's an upfront cost challenge to the transition that we want to see. Net zero is characterised by significant capital investments, but much lower operational costs. So how do we make that incentive for private investment to bridge that gap in the short term? So creating the conditions for businesses to invest in is really key. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, it is incredibly worrying about putting things on hold just because it's just not an option, and at a time when we need to clearly accelerate what we're doing. And so, Gillian, there you are. What are our citizens? What are you advising our citizens?
Yeah, so I hope everyone here has heard of citizens' advice, but what some of you may not know is that we're the statutory advocate and advice provider for energy consumers. So that's why we do quite a lot of work on energy. So I think we all know that the current cost of living crisis is having a significant impact on people, and it's going to get worse unless there's more financial support available to deal with the impact of rocketing energy bills ahead of October. Obviously, we welcome the government support announced today, but it's not enough. At Citizens Advice, we're already breaking what we call unwelcome records every month now, with the number of people coming to us for emergency charitable support, from food to fuel vouchers, rising each month. Overall demand for advice is also up significantly. We had over 300,000 people coming to us for advice in the month of March. And that trend was already in effect before our bills went up by 54% on the 1st of April. So without further financial support, it is going to get a lot worse because while energy bills are a major contributor to the rising inflation facing households and businesses, other essential products and services are also increasing in cost. And as others have said, that is a risk to the net zero transition, because when you have an increasing number of households who can't afford to pay for the essentials, people aren't in a space to think longer term. And I think the politics of making long-term investments and change get trickier, and the questions around fairness, who pays and how, will start to get a lot more political. And we're already seeing some of that emerge, certainly with some elements within Parliament. And I think the myth I want to tackle is that the public aren't or won't be on board with the net zero transition. And in saying that, I'm not in any way downplaying the challenges ahead, because there's many. But people can see the impact of climate change around them, and surveys consistently show that they're willing to play their part. So we at Citizens Advice think a fair net zero transition is definitely achievable. And building and maintaining consensus around the necessity of the transition is possible. In terms of where we are, like others, we welcome the ambition of the government's energy strategy, but it didn't have enough in it to tackle the short-term affordability challenges that we're dealing with right now. So if we want to scale up ambitions in the net zero space, then we need to deal with those current affordability challenges at the same time as laying down the sort of longer term solutions that mean as many people as possible can make changes to their homes in the 2020s and beyond. And that's everything from installing low carbon heating, improving the energy efficiency of their property, and using electricity in a more flexible way by signing up to smart tariffs or using some new smart technology. And again, as others have said, using less energy or using energy when it's cheaper is the best way to solve the energy affordability crisis in the longer term. And so where we are right now, some households are in a position to make those changes, so that the new VAT cuts announced by the government should help stimulate that market. But many households aren't in a position to afford to make those investments because they can't afford their current bills. So there needs to be more targeted support available ahead of October. And we don't think this should be a matter for debate anymore. It's absolutely necessary to stave off a sort of looming catastrophe we can all see ahead of us. But we also need to put in place the changes necessary to make it easier for people to understand and feel confident about making changes to their homes. If we want the public to do their part, we have to make it as easy as possible for them. So beyond the need for sort of more short-term financial support, I think there's probably three key priorities that need to be tackled. The first is investing in clear, comprehensive advice and support so people understand what to do, how to do it, and that they're protected if things don't go to plan. And I think important point here, it's not just about inspiring behavioral change. That's crucial, absolutely. But on a practical level for people, their experience of the net zero transition is going to be their interactions with a series of different consumer markets. And so alongside providing people with advice and support, we need to be doing things like gathering the right data to help these markets function better and ensure that people are getting a good experience. We think this is a gap that really needs to be plugged. It's not a big enough part of the government strategy at the moment. We also need to sort out the wider consumer protection framework. Net zero for homes is a huge infrastructure project that's going to affect virtually every home and business in this country. But
the regulations we've got in place aren't up to scratch. We're going to be installing hundreds of thousands of new heat pumps a year or retrofitting properties. Like our homes and businesses, those regulations need to be future-proofed. And then we need to make sure that there's a much wider range of finance options available, and that includes both accelerating the existing schemes, we're putting more money into things like ECO, the boiler upgrade scheme, so they can reach more people quicker. But we also need to make sure that the sort of private finance options are brought forward so people can access affordable finance when they need to. So I think we're in a lucky situation in Britain in that we've got a public that supports the net zero transition, and I think sort of priority for us is making sure that we don't squander their support by failing to prioritise and ensure it's a good consumer experience for them.
Thanks, Gillian. I'm very conscious of everybody's time, and also it's been a breakneck speed, and I wanted to get everybody involved in the discussion, but no pressure, Adam.
No, I'm going to be quick because Neil needs as much time as possible to answer all the issues. So congratulations.
I'm always very interested in what you have to say.
I'm from National Energy Action, which is a fuel poverty charity, so a very particular kind of take on this. I want to start with what the Minister said, because I'm probably going to be a bit more critical of the strategy than others. I know it's quite common that you write the title of the publication after you finish the conclusion, but I was confused, and I still am, whether it was an energy strategy, an energy crisis strategy, an energy security strategy, or an energy supply strategy. For me, the absence of demand reduction in any way there is not because that's where they set out to address the energy crisis. It's not. It's just because they chose not to focus the solutions on that. And we've gone through a whole raft of policy interventions, 10-point plans and heat building strategies and fuel poverty strategies and energy supply strategies, and the accelerant element of it, which I applaud in so many of the issues that the government is taking forward, is entirely absent when it comes from demand. In fact, it's not just absent, we've slammed the brakes on over the past decades, and we're paying the cost directly for those households who are most directly affected by the cost of living crisis, but the opportunity costs about how much further we could be along the route of insulating ourselves from volatile commodity prices. So it's unforgivable, and it means that the strategy is incoherent. It is especially incoherent in the current context with the cost of living crisis. So first of all, everything Gillian said, absolutely agree with all that. The people who get hit hardest in a cost of living crisis that's supercharged by energy prices are people on the lowest incomes, but in the least efficient homes and with the least amount of consumer agency. So if you have a strategy that doesn't try to resolve that conundrum, you fail. It's a pass-fail criteria, and at the moment it fails. But that's being curmudgeonly. There are lots of reasons why. So one of the cliches that trot out kind of all the time is there is no pathway to net zero that doesn't travel through the homes of the poor. They have the leakiest homes, it emits the most carbon, they have the least amount of consumer agency to do anything about it. So it's a huge opportunity, and an opportunity that we have to grasp in all the moving parts of getting to net zero, because we have this situation where, Gillian alluded to it, you have a number of voices across the firmament that, I was going to say proxy war, that's too strong, but they're using the fuel poor and the cost of living crisis as a proxy arena to try and draw back on the necessary steps towards net zero. And if we allow that to happen, the poor will be a drag anchor on moving towards net zero, especially through energy efficiency. And not only can we not afford to do that because of net zero, we can't afford to do it because we need to align the eradication of fuel poverty and improving the quality of life of these people with the drive towards net zero, because it's a more powerful drive. We need to coattail it in the fuel poverty market. And there's lots of ways in which we're able to do that. I'll be very, very quick. That bell's tolling for me. I know it is. I'm going to skip through most of what I was going to say. The principle I would love to see, us, and I'll say us because I think the fuel poverty movement can only see resolution of our key aims within the context of net zero, is if we recognise it's not just about behavioural change and hearts and minds and grabbing people's instincts, And it's not just about functioning competitive markets or good consumer protection. It's what can we do to drive outcomes for those householders for whom optimising your asset in a way that's coherent with net zero is a foreign language, because it's never going to happen. How can we focus? How can we get government to understand the accelerant of dealing with those people in the worst conditions first, in the least efficient homes, with the least amount of agency? Because the myth I like to bust is that government can't do energy efficiency programs. It finds it very difficult when the Treasury demand perverse imperatives, short-term economic stimulus gains from it. It actually does reasonably well, but it plans long-term, does it local first, develops supply chains, insists on qualities, focusing on people who really need and want this stuff. So if we can get government to get itself out of its allergic reaction to scale energy efficiency programs, especially for people on the lowest income, we will build supply chains, we will focus it locally, we'll have agencies, supplier obligations, eco is one of them, people who know what they're doing, how to do it. You'll have the social return on investment, which we need in order to be able to propel net zero as something for the benefit of all the citizens, not just for the climate, and we'll be able to break the back of those who say, well, you can't do that because the costs for people on the lowest incomes. Let's think about the distribution of benefits. Let's think about the distribution of costs as well. But until we're able to identify the social benefits, the social dividends from it, the social return on investment, this will feel like a chore to do energy efficiency for those people who will not be able to do it. We'll have a rump who will continue to suffer. We won't be able to bank the carbon savings, and we'll never have anything that's like a strategic response to a cost of living crisis.
So quite a lot of votes there on energy efficiency again. I'm going to go to you, Neil, now. You've heard a lot, not from the Minister. He's gone, so you can say what you like, and we won't say anything. We've had a really varied discussion and excellent contributions from everybody. But I go back to the original question: how are we going to do this? We've got some really good ideas. We haven't even touched on a lot of the issues, including job skills. That will be for another session. We're going to be looking at how we're going to myth bust around transport. We've already had a session on EV. We'll have another one. Right across the piece. We'll be looking into the housing as well. How we myth bust, how we make that happen. But really today, this is a big one in terms of the actual price of energy, an energy price when you're in a terrible situation. Anyway, over to you.
Which is a huge issue, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about it and explain, hopefully usefully, what Ofgem can do, but also what we can't do. Of course, so the UK, we have actually made pretty good progress in decarbonising our electricity sector. We've got a lot further to go, but that progress has been pretty fast over the last decade. But we are at a point in this transition to net zero where we remain dependent on natural gas, as people appreciate, both in electricity, but obviously for our heating sector as well, where I think about 85% of homes are still burning natural gas at home for their heat. So of course, this exceptional rise in gas prices that we've seen over the last few months is hitting the UK hard. It's hitting industry and commerce hard. It's hitting consumers hard. The price cap has delayed and smoothed the impact of those price rises for domestic consumers, for households. That's hugely important. And obviously the price cap also ensures that household consumers can only be charged a fair price, so it caps that price, prevents excessive profits being made. But the price cap was never intended and is not able to subsidise or completely insulate consumers, household consumers, from those rising prices of energy. Suppliers need to recover the cost of supplying energy to consumers. So unfortunately, price cap is not the answer to the affordability challenge, although of course we in Ofgem do work closely with government and indeed the industry to support measures that can help insulate consumers and help consumers to these genuinely difficult challenges that they're already in. But the rise in the gas price has changed the economics of the transition to net zero. Now, of course, we don't know if these very high prices will be sustained. We hope not. But it does look like we're in a higher, more volatile gas price world. And in that world, low carbon technologies are relatively cheaper. Ones that did look a little bit expensive don't look so expensive anymore, and there were already plenty, as other speakers have suggested, that were already good value even at previous gas prices. So this really is a reason to accelerate the transition, as I think most speakers have been also saying and agreeing. And the government and indeed the minister set out its approach in the energy security strategy: more renewables, more nuclear, more hydrogen being, I suppose, the three key elements of it. And where one of the roles we can play in Ofgem is to help facilitate that tens of billions of investment that Chris was talking about, facilitate that at least cost to consumers. So we are setting up new regimes for economic regulation that will enable investment in new nuclear power, in CCS infrastructure, and help get those invested, get those billions of pounds of investment flowing at relatively low cost of capital. And that brings down the cost for consumers of the transition. We also, as our role as the regulator of networks, gas and electricity, we can again bring down the cost, so huge amounts of the new transmission cable will be needed to connect the new renewables and nuclear plants. Huge amounts of distribution, the more local level electricity cables will be needed to support electric vehicles, local solar, and the growth in heat pumps. So we've heard how electricity demand might double. The network capacity will need to increase as well, and Ofgem can help bring down the cost of all that investment, and that's really vital, I think, for bringing down costs for consumers. And I'd also say, as Rachel said, we can make sure and help ensure that network capacity is utilised in the most efficient way by bringing forward incentives for flexibility, supporting more flexible use of electricity in the system to make best use of those assets and reduce the investment required in new assets, both generation and network assets. We also support investment in innovation. So we have an innovation funding through networks, which is about £100 million per year, which is targeted at those, we are now making sure it's targeted at those innovations and investments that can help this transition to net zero at least cost for consumers. And finally, as a number of others have said, it's really vital that consumers are protected through this transition and that they feel they can participate. And so Ofgem has a range of protections for consumers to help them now through the current period, but also to help them as the market changes, to make sure that as new products and services emerge into the energy market through innovation, through change, through investment, that our regulations are being updated to protect consumers, make sure they're not exploited, make sure they understand the choices and can make rational, informed choices that help bring down costs on that journey.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm sorry to put you at the end, but I think it actually worked quite well, frankly. But to wrap it up, I'm sorry to all you wonderful people who stayed for the debate and haven't had the opportunity to ask the questions. I am going to call it to an end. We've got the room for another 10 minutes, so you can chat amongst yourselves. I would just say, in conclusion, the Net Zero APPG does bring together a great collaboration. I think today we've had excellent contributions. Thank you particularly for Margriet for coming over, and also that sort of comparison about how this is on the global aspect, but also go right down to the domestic situation. That these are big issues, and we want to really keep informing and shaping the debate, putting these ideas into government. Myles and I, it's not just me and Myles, but we've been working on the 10-point plan. We think that we have put some ideas into that space, and we'll continue to do that. So as I say, this is the start of the sessions. We will be doing more on myth-busting throughout the year and on the delivery piece, but this is an essential first step, and I think very timely to get that thought processes out when you have got, the Ukraine, a war in the Ukraine, prices going through the roof, cost of living, you know, potential recession. This is impacting on each and every one of us, and you know, we need to get cracking. That's enough for me, I think. Any more final comments? Otherwise, I'll call this excellent meeting closed.
One myth that this is you said lots of people think this is unaffordable. Net zero looks unaffordable. Just remind yourself, recapturing the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that's generated by your home boiler would cost less than your gas price has gone up in the past month. Now, your gas price has gone up a lot, and that's not a good thing. We've got 30 years to get to net zero. That's the kind of money we're talking about. It can be done.
Yes. And that's changing the narrative, really, which we can all want to do. Okay, thank you very much to our wonderful, wonderful speakers, one and all. You've been brilliant. And thank you all